Hello everyone, my name is Nick and I am here on behalf of What Game Now to provide a beginner's buying guide to Warmachine and Hordes. You have decided to join and play this wonderful game. Where do you start? What do you need? Quickly summarize what we're going to go over. We're going to start with the rules. Where do you get them? How do you know which ones are the most up to date? Once we get out of that, we're going to talk about the necessary tools to play, things you are going to need, guaranteed. Then we have some recommendations, things that if you get the chance are really worth the expense. Then we're going to start talking about the factions. And to do that, we're going to start with an introduction to the world. We're going to talk about theme forces, which is a game mechanic that will come up in our discussion about how to buy into new factions. We'll go into a faction description for all of the various factions in Warmachine and Hordes that will detail their background in the universe, where do they fit into the world, game mechanic descriptions, and we'll address what theme forces are available to them, and then finally talk about what we can do for some future videos. So let us not waste time and get right into this. The rules. Warmachine is currently in its 3rd edition of rules. You will hear this referred to as Mark III by the players, because the previous games were called Marks I and II. All of the core rules, the current ones, are available for free online. It requires no purchase. Go to privateerpress.com, go to the Products tab, select Warmachine or Hordes. It will take you to the website. You'll be able to download the most up-to-date rulebook from there, in addition to any errata or changes. Model statistics. There are no army books or anything like that. All of the stat cards for all of your models are available for free online. The website is called cards.privateerpress.com. I will try to make sure that they link those in the show notes. And like I said, all of this is for free. You do not have to pay a penny for the rules of Warmachine. Couple comments though. Privateer Press uses what's called a living rulebook model. What that means is if they notice an error in the rules, instead of waiting in addition to change it, they fix it during a set errata cycle. Warmachine gets errata twice a year. Any issues in terms of balance or core mechanics gets addressed at that time. Because of this, the printed books are always out of date or inaccurate. Now, if you would like a printed rulebook, there's nothing wrong with that. My advice would be to download the PDF and get it printed and bound. It will be cheaper than buying one of the hardback rulebooks. It will only include the rules, and you can simply pull out the pages that get errataed, or you can add the errata pages to the actual book itself. The digital stuff, however, is kept 100% up to date. Between that, any errata that they have, which may not have been incorporated yet, you have all the rules to play. The errata isn't that long. Most of it is just clarifying wording, timing, or dealing with things that don't really matter. We recently went through, as of September of 2019, an update into what's called the Oblivion cycle. They came out with a major event in the universe. It's called Oblivion, and they did an update to the rules where they actually removed a few core rules that were just not serving any purpose. The core books, though, the physical copies, are still useful if you're interested in things like storyline, painting, background, anything like that. The pictures I have here, the top two, are the Warmachine and Hordes Prime and Primal rulebooks. Those are the covers of the current rules. If you are looking at a book and it does not have one of those two covers, it is not the current edition. The picture on the bottom, however, is the most recent paperback rules digest that comes in the Warmachine Oblivion box set. It includes all the erratas up until the point of its printing, although it's worth noting that even a month after it came out, errors have already been spotted. So even if you get that book, there's still going to be some slight errata, and in the future there's going to be things that get changed based on player feedback or opinions. If something doesn't work, they're willing to change it. So the takeaways here are: your rules are free. Go to privateerpress.com, go into the Products tab for Warmachine, and you will find them. Physical books are of limited value, especially from a rules standpoint. They're mostly there for background and universe building. So once you have your rules and you're ready to play a game, what do you need to actually make that happen? Well, you're going to need a few things. Number one, you're going to need a measuring tape. Top right picture there is the one of the ones I use. Not any promotion or anything like that. Just I use a very small handheld one. You want something that's small and compact. A lot of people, especially when they're starting, use large tape measures that are almost contractor home improvement level. They are bulky, they are heavy, and they're really wide. If you drop them, you are going to mess the table up, you're going to bounce off the table, you're going to destroy models. They're so wide you can't even see your own base to see if you're even measuring the correct thing. So small and compact. Do not get a flexible tape measure. It can bend, there's nothing wrong with that, but don't get one of those felt or cloth or plastic ones that aren't actually rigid. We call them bendy tapes. Warmachine uses straight line movement only. Bendy tapes lead to problems. So like what I have posted in the top right would work. As for the length, make sure it measures in inches. And 99% of your measurements are 12 inches or less. Most of the measurements, all of the measurements you're going to take are probably 24 inches or less. Warmachine ranges are not terribly long. You're going to be measuring small distances. You need a tape measure that's good for that. Dice. You're going to want at least 5 dice. 4 of them being one color, and then 1 being visually different. Top left picture is an example of the dice produced by Q Workshop for Warmachine and Hordes. I believe that's the Minion dice set. All 6-sided dice. And the reason you want them in different colors is because sometimes you'll be making a dice roll that includes 2 different things. The most common thing is damage. Sometimes when you damage a Warjack or a Warbeast, you're going to have to roll for location. It's easier to do that in a single dice roll than it is to roll all the dice and then pick them up and then roll again. So my die advice would be at least 4 of one color and 1 of an off color. It is theoretically possible. I think somebody figured it was possible to hit 9 dice in a single roll. So a set of 10, 9 in one color and 1 in an off color would be more than sufficient. The last thing is templates, which is the bottom image here. 2 major templates you need are the Area of Effect template and the Spray template. The Area of Effect template is the round one in this picture. The Spray template is the one on the bottom that starts on the left side and tapers off as it goes to the right. You need actual Warmachine templates. You'll notice a few things about them. The Spray template doesn't look like any other template anybody else produces, so you need that. The Area of Effect template in Warmachine, you'll notice, has 3, 4, and 5-inch rings. Now you could replace that with a 3, 4, and 5-inch circle, but what you need is the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Instead of using a dice that has an arrow on it, for example, to randomize direction, Warmachine says, roll a direction, you move in the indicated direction. You can't move at the 1.5 position. It's 1 or 2. The last thing that kind of looks like an L shape down there that's fairly small is a common widget that comes in the Privateer Press template set. It's a generic one, at least. It's got a 1-inch, a 2-inch, and a 1/2-inch measurement. Those are the most common small measurements you will make in the game. This set is available from Privateer Press. You can also get faction-specific sets. The faction-specific set is a lot nicer because it has your faction logo on it. And the little widget that does the 1/2, 1, and 2 is actually much larger and easier to maneuver. So it's entirely up to you, though. But you are going to need these to play. Things that I recommend. Don't panic on the picture. I know there's a whole bunch of stuff here. First off, status effect tokens. So there's spells, there's resources. All of these things need to be tracked. You will need some kind of token set, or it's recommended you get some kind of token set to mark the stuff. Privateer Press produces a generic set and some faction-specific sets. It is the top middle picture, those blue tokens with the yellow insignia on them. They are generic, they are wet erase and dry erase capable, so you can write whatever effects you need on them. And they cover most of the common effects in that faction beyond that, so there's some tokens for various abilities, and they include tokens for focus. To their immediate left is a set from, I believe, Broken Egg Games, which is the official provider of licensed token sets. You will notice that unlike the set in the middle, they actually have things already written on them. These sets, while not cheap, are high-quality acrylic, and they have everything you need on them. No writing, no erasing, no forgetting. If you need a spell effect, there's a token in there with its name on it. place it next to the model. Both of these, either one, is very, very helpful when you are playing, because it's very easy to lose track of what's going on. Next up, status markers, far left picture. These are used to indicate generalized effects. They are usually not included in the specific faction sets. So Privateer Press's faction set, it's generic, it's wet erase, you can write whatever you want on them. The faction-specific sets from third parties generally don't include these. These are things like your knockdown, stationary, on fire. A set of these is also very helpful. War Room 2, large picture to the right. War Room is the official rules app for Warmachine. The app is free. You pay for access. The starter box contents are available for free on the app, no charge. If you want access to the cards for a faction, you're going to have to pay for it. You may be wondering, why would I do this if the rules are free? Well, War Room does two things. Number one, it does army construction. Not only will it help you build an army, it will prevent you from doing things that are illegal, and it will tell you if you have somehow managed to do one. If you add an illegal model, if you build a list and put it into a theme force and something's illegal, it'll flag it for you. If you put the same character in twice, it will flag that for you, and it will track points. Not necessarily the hardest thing in the world to do, but a lot of players find it really helpful. And it is integrated with the stat cards, so in the picture to the right, if you just click on the portrait of those models, you can pull up their full stat card. This makes it fairly easy to build a list as you want to go, as you want to. And then the second thing is it has a gameplay function. You can actually play a game on War Room. It will let you track damage on any model. It will track which ones are dead. It has a timer in it if you want to time your games. All of this stuff is going to be very helpful for you, especially since the living rulebook model makes physical content fairly annoying to keep up with. All the stats, all the rules, everything is up to date. If you have a rules question, you can simply click on the stat or the ability, and it will pull up any relevant aspects of the rulebook and link you to the correct page of the rulebook. Very, very helpful app. Last thing, and I don't have it written, I'm sorry, is movement sticks. Warmachine is a game that likes precision. Players like to be precise with their measurements. Once you start learning how to play precisely, you will realize how amazingly sloppy a lot of people play. Because of this, a lot of Warmachine players will buy movement sticks. The setup there is from a company called Frozen Forge. They come in sizes ranging from 3 to 14 inches, and they're exactly that distance long. Want to check the distance from your guy to your opponent? Pop a measuring stick down. It will tell you exactly. No weird measurements, or sometimes depending on the angle, it can look weird. All of these are optional, although they are highly recommended, especially the token set and War Room. So this brings us through all the generic stuff. Now we're going to start talking about the factions. And to do that, we need to first describe the world. The image on the right is the region of the Warmachine world we are dealing with. The planet is called Cain, C-A-E-N. And the game takes place in the western region of a continent called Immoren, collectively referred to as the Iron Kingdoms. You will see a number of nations on there. These nations are most of the factions, and then there are movements and things like that within these nations that are the other factions. This is a world where gods, magic, the afterlife, souls are all real, observable, and empirical. They know gods exist because those gods experience miracles. All of this has been seen. There are no questions about it. Humans, elves, dwarves, most of your generic fantasy races are here. There aren't nothing like gnomes or orcs or anything like that, but the ones I have listed are you will find. There's dragons, elves, dwarves, you name it. The level of technology for the humans is mostly steampunk level. Some of the other factions don't use steam-powered hardware, but for the most part you're going to see steam-powered machines. And because you are dealing with steampunk, you're also allowed to have some of the fantasy settings like swords and spears and all that, because the steam stuff isn't as efficient as, say, modern technology. So you can see on here a number of nations. We're going to go through them and the various factions within them. Before we do that, I want to mention something called theme forces. A theme force is a game mechanic in Warmachine that rewards players for limiting themselves to playing forces that are consistent within the world. So this could be the different branches of a nation's army. This could be different aspects of an organization. What they do is they limit you to a specific portion of the faction. The picture I have here is some models from the Gravediggers theme force made by for the Cygnar faction. You'll notice they all have the same visual theme. Not only do they share the same visual theme, they share the same mechanical themes, and their abilities complement each other. If you go out and buy a random assemblage of models in the Warmachine faction, the odds of you building a functional list that has abilities that combo off each other are fairly low, because a lot of those abilities are very specific. For example, in this picture here in the bottom center, you can see a character named Commander Anson Hitch. He has a lot of buffing abilities for his troops. They only work on models in the Gravediggers that are models that are legal in the Gravediggers theme force, called Trenchers. His abilities work on nobody else. So if you buy him, oh, he looks cool, I'm going to put him in my starter box army, he will do absolutely nothing for you, except take up space and points. So theme forces help guide you into those purchases. And it is highly recommended that a new player start with a theme force for their faction. Mechanically, what they do is they will usually provide you additional rules that help you accentuate the strength of the models you're taking to help offset their limited numbers. And in addition, allow some limited free additional models that kind of guide you towards what you need to include or key aspects of the army. Now, this doesn't get crazy. The free models are very limited in how many you can have and in what they can be. It's not just, oh, take anything you want extra. We're not talking extra combat squads of troops. It's usually support characters and such. This is the most common way the game is played. Competitively, narratively, play at home, whatever. Almost everybody plays a theme force. It has been that successful in terms of getting people to play that even high-level tournament players are building lists that are narratively accurate. And I would like to point out one thing. We're going to address these a little bit later. Some theme forces do allow for limited cross-faction play. There's a couple of them that even let you mix some of the big boy factions. Apologies, I need a drink of water here. So with that out of the way, let's begin with the factions. And we're going to start with Cygnar. In the universe, Cygnar is the largest and most prosperous human nation. It's predominantly human. It is open to other people. And recently in its history, it has undergone a period of internal strife. There was a coup. The king that was deposed had certain very loyal followers who did not like the followers of the new king. Actually sparked a small civil war. And they were on the receiving end of a large war with their northern neighbor, Khador. All of this led Cygnar to come out of this in a very weakened position. Well, that's the past. We're a few years beyond that. And now Cygnar is launching a reconquest to attempt to regain its lost prestige. It's going to take back what it lost and retake its place as the center of the world. It is worth noting that they actually have harnessed electricity, and they do use it in combat. This is a unique mechanic to Cygnar, although some other factions do have it in limited access. In terms of visual style, Cygnar is the most steampunky of them all. You have knights, you have nobles, mixed in with 19th century industrial feeling stuff like troops with rifles, the steampunk aesthetic in general, and then they throw a few Tesla coils on top of it just to top it all off. On the table, Cygnar armies are very high quality. Their units are very specialized and are very good at what they do. The downside is there's not a lot of them, and they don't always have the flexibility that they want. Cygnar has lots of mercenaries. There are mercenary models in this game that can play for a number of other factions. Cygnar has access to the most of them. Largest number, most of the good ones. There's a few ones that they wish they had, but for lore universe reasons, they can't have that. And most of their abilities rely on buffing their allies. Cygnar is not a faction that is going to take away or disrupt their opponent. They're going to make their stuff better. They have 4 theme forces: Heavy Metal, Gravediggers, Storm Division, and Sons of the Tempest. Heavy Metal is their Warjack heavy theme. big stompy robots. The robots are going to get bonuses. The types of units you're allowed to take are the ones that complement or work well with these warjacks. I do want to mention with themed forces. These are what they allow. You don't have to build it that way. You can build heavy metal with a very small number of warjacks. You can build the other theme forces with a lot of warjacks. That's part of the flexibility of the system. But their buffs and bonuses are tailored towards certain groups. The second theme force is called the Gravediggers. Signar's mainstay spearhead group is called the Trenchers. It's the top picture up on the top right. These are the people who go out, they dig trenches. They're the ones who do the bloody, grueling trench warfare. Tough, battle-hardened. They're one of the more prominent theme forces in Signar. You have the Storm Division, which is actually the picture on the bottom. These are the Knights of Signar that use electricity in battle. They are highly effective combat troops. Again, very low number. And you're also going to see some of the more weirder Signar contraptions in terms of walking Tesla coils, artillery pieces, and such. The last theme force is Sons of the Tempest. Signar has a very interesting subsection called the Gun Mages. They are mages who, instead of firing thunderbolts, imbue pistols and pistol rounds with magical properties. They're called Gun Mages. Sons of the Tempest is a theme force composed entirely of these Gun Mages. Directly south of Signar in the universe, we have the Protectorate of Menos. This is a religious theocracy that actually was part of Signar that broke off in a civil war, and is centered around the worship of the god Menos, who is the creator of man. It is worth noting that all the other factions acknowledge that Menos was the creator of man, but through worship of other gods, you can end up in the afterlife. Because of this, they view anybody who does not follow them specifically as dangerous heretics who need to be removed from the world, and who are a threat to the faithful. They consider magic a necessary heresy. In fact, many of their most powerful arcanists are actually, in a way, penitent for what they're doing. They use it to bring Menos light, although they would reject it if they could. Their armies consist of highly trained orders of things like paladins and temple guards, seen in the bottom picture, to just peasant soldiers, zealots throwing firebombs and having rockets, you name it. And they also have a theme of fire. They like to burn things. On the tabletop, they buff friendly models like Signar. The difference is Menos is going to go a lot further with those buffs. They're going to get a lot more out of these buffs. They're going to go further. They're going to make their stuff absolutely crazy. The downside is that takes a lot of effort. That takes a lot of support models to make that happen. And without the buffs, a lot of their models are actually pretty lackluster or actually even terrible. The second major point that Menos has to worry about is terrain. There's a joke in the Warmachine community that the scariest thing for a Menos player is a forest in the middle of the table, because they don't have a lot of great options for dealing with it. Like Signar, they have 4 theme forces. The Creator's Might is their warjack theme force. Lots of big stompy robots, crazy contraptions, you name it. The Faithful Masses is the peasant soldiers and the militia. Low-quality troops that are willing to die for their god Menos. Exemplar Interdiction is actually the theme force seen on the bottom right. The Exemplars are the Menite Order of Paladins, although there actually are Paladins. But they are a Menite order of knights devoted to the service of Menos, who worship him and essentially use their faith as a weapon. Last is Guardians of the Temple. This is the Menite church-specific stuff. Menos as a nation, the above stuff is actually their army. Guardians of the Temple is the actual church going to war. So the church's guardians, special forces, all of that, pushing the agenda of Menos throughout the world. In the universe, they're in the south. They also have an enclave in the north. Let me scroll back a couple pictures here. If you look at this picture, let me see. Right here is this little country called Lael. Lael was invaded by Khador, which started the war that saw the downfall of Signar. Khador occupied Lael. Signar was pushed back through this region here, which they have actually retaken. And the Protectorate of Menos also got into this by launching a crusade into Lael. So the Protectorate is predominantly focused in the south and in this war zone called Lael. That brings us to Khador. Khador is a highly imperialistic empire in the far north. They hold a grudge against everybody else because they thought they got shafted at the start of the universe when it came to a treaty. They are responsible for the large-scale conflict that created the current world situation. They seek to reclaim, or actually in their case, claim their empire as they believe it should be, that they have deserved for a long time. To do this, they use hordes of peasant soldiers backed around a few hard-hitting elements, and a little bit of dark magic in the mix. They're very direct. They don't do a lot of subtlety. If the picture of the giant stompy tank in the back isn't obvious, this guy back here, Khador and subtle aren't exactly related. On the tabletop, you're going to see lower quality troops centered around a few slower heavy pieces. You can play just the slow heavy pieces. You can play just the low quality of troops. Usually there's going to be expendable guys, and then the heavy hitting guys. Their abilities tend to focus on delivering their troops to the battle, which is either survivability or speed, or making the most out of the ones that do. Khador has 5 theme forces, which is actually slightly higher than most. Wolves of Winter is a theme force that deals with the black magic. They used cursed relics, dark occult magics, to create an army of berserkers and snow mages, essentially. Legions of Steel. Legions of Steel is the theme force relating to a group called the Iron Fangs, which are the Khador militant knightly order. Spearmen, highly well-armed, well-equipped, generally a melee-focused army, but each guy is fairly high quality. Jaws of the Wolf is the Khador Warjack theme. Lots of Warjacks are going to go around beating things up. They're slow, they're plotting, they're heavy, but when they hit like a Mack truck. Armored Core. If you look at this picture on the bottom here, you can see this guy who's almost in power armor. That's called a Man of War suit. It is a steam-powered, essentially, suit of power armor. Khador, when they build their Warjacks, they only build Warjacks that qualify as heavy class. They don't build anything lighter. These Man of War kind of fill that role. Armored Core is a theme force solely of these guys. And then the last one is Winter Guard Command. The Winter Guard, seen here on the right of this picture down here, are the conscript soldiers that make up the bulk of the Khadoran army. Winter Guard Command is them and their associate arms fighting for the motherland. After Khador, we have Cricks. Cricks is a very strange faction because there's nothing quite like it in a lot of other universes. It's formed around the Dragon Father Toruk, who is the first dragon. At the dawn of time, in an effort to control the world, Toruk split himself into a bunch of smaller dragons. He stayed himself, but created a bunch of children. Those children then promptly stabbed him in the back and ran off and tried to rule the world themselves. Toruk is not happy about this. He seeks to hunt down his wayward progeny, consume them, and regain his power. Cricks is the nation that, essentially a puppet nation, controlled by this Dragon Father, with the aim to accomplish that goal. They use pirates and raiders to collect materials, so they actually have a living arm. Pirates, raiders, reavers, you name it. But they also use necromancy and assorted technology to use the dead to bolster their numbers. Because Cricks is a very small population nation, they need to use whatever resources they can. So it's a very strange mix of ghosts, zombies, and pirates, all in the same army fighting together. On the table, Cricks is a very high damage, low durability army. Khador is slow. That's why they get shot up when they tend to get to combat. Cricks stuff just dies to a stiff breeze, for the most part. The trade-off is they're very high damage output when they get there. They operate under the assumption that half their models aren't going to get there. The abilities that Cricks is going to have is usually things that debuff their opponent. So instead of making their own guys stronger, they're going to make their opponent weaker. And they have a soul and corpse collection mechanic, or they use those mechanics to buff their own powers. Cricks has 4 theme forces. The Ghost Fleet, this is the ghosts. Literally revenants, wraiths, few living models, but for the most part ghosts. And they make up a pirate fleet. So think Pirates of the Caribbean style. Dark Host is a group called the Banes. These are warriors that the Cricks necromancers have pulled back from the afterworld, the afterlife, and have inhabited bodily hosts. They're not quite ghosts, but they're not quite zombies. And they're a highly effective military force because they're all veterans. They've been stripped of everything that isn't kill. Black Industries is the Warjack theme. You're going to see a lot of Warjacks and other mechanical contraptions. And Scourge of the Broken Coast is the living pirates. The picture in the top right is the Scourge of the Broken Coast. The women you see there are called Styxis Raiders. Yes, those are horns on their heads. It's the living arm of Cricks. So in the other ones, you're dealing predominantly with undead. You might have a few living models here and there. Scourge of the Broken Coast is almost entirely living troops. After Cricks, we have the Mercenaries. Mercenaries can be played as a faction, or they can be sent out to the other factions or played alongside the other factions according to who they work for in the universe. In the world, they have a very highly established and formal military tradition. Mercenaries have contracts. The nations sign those contracts, and both are bound by the terms until completed. These often include things like, you can't immediately hire us to go after the people we were defending. You can't have us give you information that wouldn't normally be available to you, and so on. In addition to those formal companies, you're going to see things like independent forces, resistance movements, and all of this leads to a very strange-looking army that can range from professional, well-drilled troops to ragtag bands of marauders and freedom fighters, and to even stranger things in the case of that bottom right picture. Visually, there is no one theme that unifies the mercenaries, aside from the fact that generally you aren't going to see two of most things in a mercenary army if it's not a warjack, since most of the units and models tend to be named characters. On the table, they're very character-focused, so they're going to have one guy who does one thing, and you have to put all of these separate independent pieces together and make a cohesive whole out of it. They generally don't tend to work together. They do their own thing, and you have to make it work. They have a staggering 7 theme forces. The first is called Laylee's Resistance. This is our first cross-faction theme force that I could recommend for a newer player. It represents the people of Lael fighting back against Khador and Menos invaders. We have the Irregulars. This is the dregs of the mercenaries. These are the people who have no problem going out and murdering anybody if you have enough cash to pay them. Soldiers of Fortune is the exact opposite. Those are the more uniform military forces. They center around a company called the Steelhead Company, which is the most prolific mercenary outfit. So Soldiers of Fortune is the Steelheads if you see their models running around. Talion Charter deals with pirates and privateers that are not affiliated with Cricks. So, like I said, anything pirates. Hammerstrike, the dwarf nation called Rule, does not appear in the game as a separate faction. Instead, they have a well-established military tradition also, where they send troops out to fight for the nations and make money off of it. Hammerstrike is the dwarf theme force. We have the Kingmaker's Army, which is an eclectic mix of mercenaries that serve to help Signar out of its internal strife by attacking them, if that makes any sense. Whole bunch of models. It usually includes models that generally don't work for Signar, which is a very interesting note. And then the last one is Operating Theater. This is one of those independent forces. It deals with a sub-faction called the Cephalics, which is the thing on the bottom right. They are crazy mad scientists who are using the conflicts in the Warmachine universe to their own advantage. Next up, we have the Retribution of Syra, also known as the Angry Elves. This is a movement among the elves, who live in the nation of Ios, that believe humans are responsible for the death of their gods, because humans use too much magic. The elven gods disappeared, they're having more children every year born with no souls, and they believe human mages are to cause. So they're going out trying to kill all human mages. Simple premise. They are leveraging a combination of superior technology from Ios, which is a combination of magic and machine. They are not steam-powered. They are magically imbued and controlled objects. They're going to consist of guerrilla warriors designed to hunt down these mages, the knightly orders of the elves, and the armies of the elven houses. The elves are organized into various houses. The top right picture is an example of what are called House Guard riflemen. On the table, they have a fairly balanced playstyle with no particular preference in any one direction. They're a very flexible army, although they have a lot of effects that rely on pushing and pulling enemy models around. So, kinetic effects. I do want to mention at this stage, I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but now is the time. When I'm talking about these playstyles, these are strengths, not things they do that nobody else does. So I mentioned in Signar that Signar has a high-quality army. You could play a horde of low-quality Signar troops. You can play a high-quality Khador army. Default army for Signar is generally going to be very high-quality, though. Anyway, onto the Retribution theme forces. Shadows of the Retribution. These are the guerrillas who go out and they hunt down the mages. Their job is to pick them off at a range and sink back into the shadows. Legions of Dawn, the militant arm, or the knightly order, seen on the right of this picture in the bottom, for the elves is called the Dawn Guard. They are the sentinels of the nation of Ios, its first line of defense. Legions of Dawn is the theme force that consists entirely of them. Forges of War is the Retribution Warjack theme force. And then finally, Defenders of Ios deals with the specialist troops of the various elven houses, so the House Guard and any specialized units associated with them. These can vary quite a bit, but for the most part, you're dealing with House Guard units or House whatever units. Next up, we have the Convergence of Cirrus. The Convergence is a very strange faction because it's a religious order of scientists, which seems like a little bit of an oxymoron, but let me explain. They revere the goddess Cirrus, who is actually hidden from humanity until a few hundred years before the current time, when she was observed through celestial motion. The only way to really encounter this god is through math, science, astronomy, all of this. The Convergence of Cirrus is a cult formed around her. Their goal is to essentially turn the planet into a device so their goddess may manifest in the material world and they can live in mathematical harmony. In order to do this, though, most of the other factions don't appreciate the Convergence building temples and machines and destroying towns to make that happen. A few notes about this. They view artificial intelligence as an abomination. So the warjacks of the other factions do not exist in the Convergence. They instead use something called vectors. This is the first faction we're going to encounter that has a unique mechanic. The Convergence warjacks have different control systems and behave a little bit differently. The result is they are highly efficient warjack-based armies. Anyway, a little bit back onto their universe. The most notable thing about them is they have perfected a technique to transfer their souls into machines. The top picture there is their faction leader. She resides in this little glowing thing on the chest of the robot. That's her soul. The rest of it's a mechanical body. They maintain complete consciousness and independent thought during this transition. This is essentially their afterlife. On the tabletop, their armies are composed of clockwork soldiers who have made this transition, backed up by the occasional living priest who is willing to risk the possibility of permanent death to help the Convergence achieve its goals. On the tabletop, their unique mechanic allows for very heavy warjack armies, more so than anybody else. Anybody can play a warjack heavy army, but on average, the warjacks aren't going to be as efficient as a handful of well-supplied ones. The Convergence can have 10 highly effective warjacks on the field at one time because of their mechanic. They tend to focus on an attrition style of play where they're going to outlast their opponents. Their stuff tends to be fairly sturdy or can go out and get things done. Then what they're going to do is they're going to keep doing this on a turn-by-turn basis, bring guys back. The advantage of having mechanical guys is you can repair them in the field, so they can have one of the more ready access to bringing troops back to the field. They're going to outlast their opponent, and spells tend to focus on support aspects. They have very few outright damaging effects. They only have two theme forces. Clockwork Legion is the Clockwork Infantry forces. Keep in mind that because this is a theme force, you can totally play Clockwork Legion with a lot of warjacks. Its bonuses are tuned towards the infantry, though. And the last one is Destruction Initiative, which is the artificial constructs, the warjacks. This giant thing in the background is called a Prime Axiom. He's in Destruction Initiative, and he gets a lot of bonuses out of Destruction Initiative. Next up, we have the Crucible Guard, the last of the true Warmachine factions. The Crucible Guard is an order of alchemists that was nearly destroyed by the war that Khador started. Khador overran a lot of their workshops, and they slowly retreated and rebuilt in Signar and other nations. Now, with Signar's reconquest of its lost territories, the Crucible Guard has seen an opportunity to reclaim what they lost. They are doing so with an army of very well-equipped, highly trained, and very well-paid former mercenaries and ex-soldiers. So their average troop is actually a veteran and has some of the best equipment that the Iron Kingdoms can provide. Now, you may notice in that picture in the bottom, are those tanks? Yes, the Crucible Guard actually has tanks or tank-like vehicles. Their technology is a step up from the other Iron Kingdoms. They have jetpacks, they have tanks, they have artillery rockets, you name it. On the tabletop, they have a ranged focus like Signar, but they have a spell list and other associated abilities like Cricks where it's a lot of debuffs. So what they're going to do is they're going to degrade their opponent and blow it off the table with guns. Two theme forces like the Convergence, we have Magnum Opus, which is the infantry-focused theme, and Prima Materia, which is the Warjack and Construct-focused themes. If you want tanks, go play Prima Materia. Now we're on to the Hordes factions. These use the Fury mechanic. First off is the Trollbloods. This is a coalition of Trollbloods. Trollbloods are a form of civilized troll. Trolls have multiple subspecies in the Warmachine universe. The Trollbloods are one of them. They live in tribes called Creels, and they have formed together to stave off incursions by humanity and the other forces, as they basically roll over the Trollbloods in the process of killing each other. Their goal is to essentially carve out a place where they can live in peace. Unfortunately, in order to do that, they have to kick somebody else out. There are a few bad apples who are looking for more violent responses. Seek retribution and revenge. Technology-wise, they're very low-tech tribal, as you can see from the picture on the top, although they do have some retired military tech that they have stolen from the various nations. So they do have things like rockets and bazookas. On the table, they tend to use things like earth and their effects to make their guys more sturdy. Their job is to outlast their foe. Very similar to the Convergence. The difference is the Convergence is going to repair their models, bring them back, go out and actively take opposing pieces away. The Trollbloods are just going to sit there and take it. They're going to take the first punch and they're going to hit you harder for it. Theme force-wise, Band of Heroes. Band of Heroes is a theme force focused predominantly on the more heavily armored trolls. Things like the actual military trolls. The units are called champions, fell callers, fenblades, the actual organized troops that the Trollbloods had. Krill Company deals with the tribesmen who have to take up arms to defend their homes, or in some cases take their homes back. So this is the more bulk armies. They're the average troll people trying to work their way out of the world. It does have a focus, however, towards ranged weapons. So this is one of the more technologically advanced theme forces. Storm of the North, these deal with the trolls from the far north. They essentially have an Arctic theme to them. They're very resilient. They rely on freezing their opponents. And they have bears. They have a unit of attack bears. Last is the Power of Dunia. Power of Dunia is the Warbeast heavy theme force that you would see in any other faction. Next, we have the Circle Orboros. The Circle Orboros is a movement of druids who believe that too many humans populate the world, and they want to cull that population. They worship a god called the Devourer Worm, which is the eternal foe of the god Menos, who is also the god of civilization. So they view their job is to balance civilization and the wilds, and they think they've gone too far in terms of civilization. They're going to use armies of tribesmen, primal magic, mystical creatures like griffins and satyrs. They've even created some stone golems to accomplish this goal. The result is a highly maneuverable, not necessarily fast, maneuverable army that has an asymmetric style and avoid stand-up fights. They want to go in, they want to take what they can, and they want to avoid retribution. They cannot sit there and slug it out toe-to-toe. Factions, or theme forces, you have the Bones of Orboros theme force. This is the Stone Golems and their associated support models. The Devourer's Host. The Devourer's Host theme force is predominantly the tribesmen. So they have general human tribesmen. They have things called skinwalkers, which are humans who can actually transform into a wolf-like entity. They have the Tharn, which are humanoid. All of them fighting for the actual Circle Orboros. Secret Masters is the theme force of the actual druids themselves, called Blackclads. A lot of magic effects. They're the spellcasters. And then last we have the Wild Hunt, which is the Warbeast theme force. You're going to see a trend here. There's a Warbeast or Warjack theme force in every army. The Legion of Everblight. So one of the dragons that Toruk created, his name is Everblight. Everblight figured out real fast that he's small, shrimpy, and doesn't want to die. So he created a way to split himself up amongst a variety of followers. And the Legion of Everblight is the army formed around that. So these are corrupted Nis, which is a form of Snow Elf, and ogres, that serve the dragon. His presence corrupts them, causes them to grow horns and spines and mutate. And their job is to go usurp the Dragon Father Toruk and eventually rule the world for Everblight. He's commanding this army. There's a lot of dragon spawn. It's a very mutated looking army. They're recognizable as something that they once were. And your army is going to contain a mix of all of these elements. They are a high-speed army. They don't lack for durability necessarily. Particularly the Ogryn portion of the armies tend to be very durable. But their biggest weakness is they can sometimes struggle with damage output. So they can usually hide, run around. They're very fast. The circle is maneuverable. These guys are just fast. Or are able to withstand the damage. But the actual hitting back part can be a bit of a problem for them. Theme forces, there's 4 of them, like we've encountered multiple times. The first one is Children of the Dragon. Children of the Dragon is the generic theme force that covers all of the Nis. So the Snow Elves, this is their theme force. Oracles of Annihilation deals with the mages and the corrupted magic users of the faction. Primal Terrors is the Ogryn, the top right picture there. And then Ravens of War is their Warbeast heavy theme force and their reconnaissance elements. Now you will notice very interestingly that they don't have a theme force that's necessarily designed solely for Warbeasts. They're the one exception. Next up we have the Scorn. The Scorn are a nation from the Far East of the Warmachine universe. They look like elves, they are not elves. They follow a very strict warrior code, and they have invaded from the Far East in an effort to fight the people who live there. They believe that through war and pain, they are going to be able to achieve a higher level of existence and a more beneficial afterlife. So they have units that rely on torture, pain infliction on their own guys, and are very, very militaristic. So their ultimate goal of any given Scorn is to prove themselves worthy to be interred in an immortal soul called, or an immortal being called, or an immortal shell called an immortal. That's a caste called the Exalted. In the process, they view anybody who is not a Scorn as being only worthy of death or enslavement, so they are not somebody who's pleasant to fight against. Visually, their theme force is highly regimented warriors with the occasional spirit guardian, and they have a mix of kind of Asian or East Asian or Persian aesthetics, cataphracts and things like that. On the table, they're a very direct army that focuses very highly on damage output. They're going to go out, they're going to inflict damage. They're going to do this by accentuating their own damage or ensuring that they're going to get the most out of their own guys. They do soul collection like Cricks, and they can use it to do some crazy things. 4 theme forces. Disciples of Agony. This is the rather generic theme force, but it focuses predominantly on the models that are in their Pain Giver cast. They're the more pain sadist-focused end. The Exalted is a theme force focused around those who have ascended to the status of an Exalted warrior. Their souls inhabit constructs, and they fight through those. Masters of War. Masters of War is the more generic theme force. This includes your average Scorn soldier, and is very infantry-focused. And then lastly, we have Winds of Death. This is the one that it doesn't really offer any bonuses, and it is kind of a weird amalgamation of all of them. Again, no distinct War Beast-focused theme force. We have the Minions. The Minions are the equivalent of the mercenaries in the Hordes universe, the Horde side of games. They are generally unaligned. They're working towards their own goals, or will occasionally work alongside these other factions as they see fit. They consist of two halves. The Pharaoh, which are on the bottom there, they're kind of pigmen. They style their civilization off of man, but the average Pharaoh is not smart enough or skilled enough to actually do any of it. The result is their stuff is kind of in poor repair, cobbled together. It almost has a very kind of Mad Max feel to it. They're trying to form an empire, but they don't have the basis to do it. The Gatormen, exactly as their name implies in the top picture, are humanoid alligators. They live in the swamps, and generally just leave them alone. They're the get off my lawn. There is a group of them that seeks to elevate one of their members, his name is Barnabas, to the status of god. The Gatormen tend to be very low tech. They have swamp magic. Voodoo is the best term to describe them. On the tabletop, the Gators focus again on an attrition playstyle. They can bring guys back. They can be very caster focused. They're going to hit you and they're going to kill you. They're not going to do anything tricksy. The Pigs have very high damage output effects, but they tend to hurt themselves a lot. Things tend to blow up or go wrong. They have three theme forces. The first one's called the Blindwater Congregation. That is the very specific Gatorman theme force, and deals with the Gatormen trying to elevate one of their members to godhood. The Thornfall Alliance is the organized attempt by the Pharaoh to actually create a unified empire. And Will Work for Food is a very strange one. It deals with the fact that the minions can end up in weird places, essentially just trying to survive. This covers a lot of the stranger minions that don't necessarily fall into either of the two categories. Next Hordes faction we have is the Grimm Kin. This is a little weird and requires a bit of an explanation. Long story short, they're an army of fairy tale monsters trying to reap the world of sinners. They are run by a faction of humans called the Defiers. When Menos first appeared to humanity and demanded worship, in exchange he offered humanity gifts in terms of walls and people and cities and all of that. He offered the security of civilization. The Defiers rejected this. And in exchange, Menos cast them, while they were still alive, into the underworld. This transformed them. It stripped away everything that was not part of their fundamental desire, and gave them a lot more power. Over the centuries and millennia, the Defiers have seen the downfall of humanity and believe it is their job to fix this. So, for example, one of them is called the Child. The Child is exactly as you might expect, a little girl, or she was at one time a couple thousand years ago. She rejected Menos' laws, which put parents over their children. She seeks to free children from their parents by making them all orphans. This is the style of we're going to help you that Grimm Kin try to do. The actual Grimm Kin army is consistent of those creatures that they have created to serve their purposes and accomplish their goals. They are the ones who reap what you sow. The picture on the top is the Hollowmen, for example. They are soldiers who fled their posts. Sometimes soldiers who flee, running away from a battle, leaving their comrades to die, will encounter a light. And they'll go towards the light, seeing it as safety, only to find it is the lantern of the Hollowmen. And eventually that soldier joins their ranks. On the tabletop, Grimm Kin have a unique mechanic called Arcana. This allows them, they're essentially trap cards, if you want to think about that. Your opponent does something, triggers an effect. They are a very support-heavy army. A lot of their stuff isn't terribly impressive, but between the Arcana and the support behind it, they're going to magnify its effect. The downside is it does require some setup. They have a resource where they like to use corpses to create effects. You need to set a lot of their stuff up to work well. But when it works really well. So they're easy to disrupt, but if they get where they're going, they're nigh unstoppable. 2 theme forces. First one's called Dark Menagerie. This is the Warbeast Heavy theme force. The units are generally not seen in this theme force. And then Bump in the Night deals with the cavalcade of creatures that they have spawned to reap humanity. So this is their warriors, their troops, their infantry, not necessarily the Warbeasts. The last faction is the newest, and it's called the Infernals. So the Infernals actually gave humanity magic. Humanity was not created with magic. Humans got it as a bargain with the Infernals. One of the human gods actually did it. Her name is Thamar. And the price for giving humanity magic was that at some point in the future, the Infernals would come and reap 2/3 of humanity for their souls. The Infernals live in a world where souls are essentially a tradable commodity. They can use it to do a lot of things, and they get power from it. They have come to collect their debt. The reason that they're not the end of the world is because they're actually early. The Grimm Kin were released into the world to cull the world of those people who are generally bad. A lot of those people were humans converted to the infernal cause by contract. So the Infernals lost a lot of their assets in the material world, and this forced them into revealing their hand early, which is why they have a chance. The world has a chance, and this is not the end of the world. Demons is probably a bad word, but they're that style. They don't live in the underworld. They actually live in a completely other dimension. On the tabletop, they have a completely set of unique mechanics. The first is called Essence. As they kill people, they collect souls. That's the fuel they use, not focus or fury. They're also the only faction in the game that can reliably summon new models to their army. There's some other factions with some very limited ability. The Infernals can just summon a new Warbeast on the spot. They're called Horrors in the Infernal faction. They have 2 theme forces. Dark Legacy is the Infernal theme force. Interestingly enough, it does not favor Warjacks or infantry. And the second one is Hearts of Darkness, which is a very strange theme force. This is a theme force that allows for cross-faction play. It is a what-if scenario. It takes a single warcaster from a number of factions and says, this caster might have turned to the Infernals at some point. They haven't in the fiction. They're not planning to in the fiction as far as we're aware. But this is a what-if scenario of the people who could have fallen. So they let the Infernals actually play with casters from other armies running their faction. This is very helpful because the Infernals are actually the smallest faction in the game in terms of models, and that doesn't seem terribly likely to change in the long run. So with that, we're almost an hour in. Thank you for sitting here and dealing through this. Future video content. First off, we're going to do a video, or at least the plan is to do a video over each theme force. If you were counting, that's a lot of them, so this might take a while. We're going to go into detail of that theme force. What does it include? How does all this stuff interact, and how does it work on the tabletop? We're going to discuss basic list building tips. Start here, you're going to want lots of these, things like that. And then we're going to list things to purchase right off the bat and things to avoid. We'll also provide some commentary on how newbie-friendly the theme force is. If you're interested in a specific theme force, let us know in the comments, and we can put it further up into the pipeline. With that, I will see you all next time. Have a good one.